Hi, everyone. This is Justin Sellers here today for another episode of the 125 Thoughts podcast series. Today's episode will cover the future of the workplace and what impact automation and artificial intelligence will have. I'm very honored to be able to talk today with Mr. Ernst. I discovered Mr. Ernst from his article titled Economics of Artificial Intelligence, Implications for the Future of Work. Mr. Ernst is a chief macroeconomist at the International Labor Organization, where he's responsible for understanding the future of the workplace and analyzing alternative paths for jobs and earnings to improve upon current trends. His work helps decision makers in understanding developments in skills and labor costs around the globe, providing them with the necessary intelligence to make effective long-term decisions. Thank you for joining us today on the podcast, Ms. Ernst.
Thank you for having me.
So to start off, what made you interested in technology and economics in general? And when were you first introduced to them?
I'm already a bit of an older person, if you want to, and my interest really started when German reunification happened in the early 1990s. That's when I was graduating from high school, and all this transition that happened at the time, the collapse of the Soviet Union and the planned economy was really something that dragged me or interested me into or brought me into economics. And so from that onwards, I continued working on more long-term issues related to economic development, productivity, labor markets, technology. And so that's how my start into the university and academia actually came about.
Awesome. Okay. So now I want to first start with automation. The first revolution was the advent of the steam engine. Second was electricity. Third was CAD and computer-aided manufacturing. Which revolution do you think had the greatest impact? Or perhaps will it be this upcoming revolution 4.0?
Well, I guess it depends a bit on how you look at it. Obviously, one is always very impressed by what you see around you or what the changes that you experience yourself. But if you look at what really triggered the uptake in economic development was definitely the steam engine and electricity. I mean, that's when the Industrial Revolution started and all the improvements in living standards came about. Whereas now, if you look at the latest changes in terms of robotics, in terms of artificial intelligence, you don't seem to see much of it. I mean, maybe it's we are impressed by what these machines can do, but in terms of the actual improvements in living standards, we don't see much. So I would definitely put my bet on more on the earlier changes, technological changes, whereas with the current ones, we are still waiting for the big gains to come. And I'm not saying that they can't come, but I mean, for the moment, they're certainly not on the table.
And in terms of artificial intelligence, are you more concerned or excited about the potential of artificial intelligence?
Well, I mean, I think that, at the ILO, we have this saying that the future we want. So it really depends a bit on the policy decision that we take in terms of how we want to implement this technology. And I mean, again, coming back to my previous response on how much of the technology actually will help us impacting a society. Yeah? And that's a decision that's a discussion that depends very much on what type of political decisions we make. So yes, there's a huge potential in terms of improving our way of life, in terms of making us more efficient, in terms of also solving some of the major challenges that we currently face in terms of climate change, in terms of the pandemic, obviously, etc. So I think that there are major possibilities also for healthcare. And then there are the challenges that we all know about, the ethical implications, the high concentration in the digital economy, and the inequality that it brought with it. So I think that what we actually see will very much depend on the political decision we take.
And going to the ethics of it, do you believe there should be regulations in place for AI?
Depends on which area you want to look at it. I mean, for instance, one thing and I think that the debate in the US is very much going to that direction as well. One thing where you definitely want to look at this in terms of competition law. What kind of competition law do we need to what extent do we need to change the current way we regulate in the industries? Do we need to maybe kind of limit the protection that we give to certain intellectual property rights around data? data ownership? Do we need to kind of totally differently regulate the data ownership in a sense that we should give more ownership to those who are actually producing these data, which is us as users? Or do we need to redistribute, for instance, the benefits, the profits that these industries are making? I think these are the questions that we need to address. And then in terms of the actual product safety, I think there are issues related to the question to what extent we can really hold those engineers and companies responsible for the consequences of their technologies. But I think that, these product safety issues are something that we have thought about already in the context of different technologies. So it's not really completely new. I think what's really new is the changes that these digital technologies brings in terms of the inequality, in terms of the distribution of benefits. And I think this is something where we definitely need to think more thoroughly in terms of how we can better distribute the gains of these technologies across society.
And so going back to artificial intelligence, do you believe we're already seeing it implemented today in many companies and in manufacturing? Do you believe in general the implementation will be abrupt or gradual in our future?
Well, from what we can observe, it's depends very much which industries you're looking at. So, I mean, we have done a study that's not published yet, but coming out early next year, where we kind of try to understand a bit better what's driving the technological development, which sectors are driving it. And you actually see that most of the sectors that are driving the changes in AI around tech companies and communications companies. So everything around ICT and computer tech companies that were already in the previous waves of technological advancements. These are the companies that are actually implementing also a lot of these new technologies. When you go a bit further, like into other both manufacturing and service sectors, you see that actually the diffusion of these new technologies is much slower. Partly because it's not entirely obvious for companies what they should do with these new technologies, and partly because there's a lot of resistance among their workforce to actually use and implement these new technologies. So the further you go away from the tech specific companies into different areas, I mean, including, for instance, areas like agriculture, you see that there is much more reluctance to actually implement this. And I think that's part of it. It depends. It's always the same issue, as long as companies don't feel the competitive pressure to use those new technologies, they will not implement that, and as soon as you see some companies moving ahead, becoming much more profitable, then all of a sudden these things start to accelerate. But for the moment, I would say that other than in certain very specific sectors, we don't see that yet happening. And I think the question is that a technological problem? Has it something to do with the technology itself, or is it just simply a fact that for the moment we don't see enough of kind of leading companies in each of these sectors to take advantage of it?
So you believe, you're saying in other sectors, it will be pretty gradual until they feel pressured to implement?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's it's coming. I don't see why it shouldn't be, but sometimes it takes also a bit of more effort. I mean, take for instance medical science. I mean, we have seen now with this pandemic that all these new approaches that have been implemented, and I'm not saying that they're related to AI, they are just new innovations in medical research itself. All of a sudden with this pandemic, you can overcome the initial hurdle. And all of a sudden, everybody jumps on this bandwagon. I mean, the new technologies that have been developed to come up with vaccines, they are most likely also implementable in other areas in medical research. And the same will be for AI. You see, at the beginning, people are reluctant. They don't see the point. Nobody implements it, and so there's no imitation effect. But once you kind of get over this initial hurdle, and that might be an external shock, it might be somebody had a smart idea, etc. Once you get over that initial hurdle, it will trigger. But it's very sector specific. It really depends. I mean, take for instance self-driving cars. I mean, for the moment we don't have that. And to what extent we really get totally autonomous cars is yet it's still to be discussed. But as soon as you see, for instance, long-haul truck drivers coming up with solutions to actually implement platooning as one way of saving significantly on labor costs, I can guarantee you, once you have the first logistics company implementing this, you will see all the others following suit. For the moment, it's not there, but as soon as you have the first person who actually implement this successfully, everybody else will come as well.
Transitioning to jobs, which type of jobs do you think will be targeted the most in terms of job loss from artificial intelligence?
So this is a really tricky question, because obviously people have anticipated from previous waves of automation, saying, oh, it's basically all those routine jobs, the things that can be replicated very simply in an algorithm, put it into a computer, and these jobs will disappear. So most of the time is manufacturing jobs and sometimes low-skilled service sector jobs that will be targeted. I mean, these days you can even have robots that can shake your that can play bartender. I mean, a friend of mine works in, is Professor Nevada, and he tells me that in Las Vegas, apparently you already have robots that kind of
Wow.
shake your gin tonic. so that's obviously amazing. But when you think a second step, when you take the second step and think about AI, actually can also help a lot on in this area. So one of the things that Google, for instance, did was they have this Google Glasses, and Google Glasses didn't really work as a consumer object, but it really worked very well in manufacturing, because it actually helped those on the manufacturing line to actually understand exactly how to use the machines without necessarily having a heavy training to do that, because the Google Glass would orient you in the direction that you have to do the next step. And I think these are the kinds of things. So the potential for especially artificial intelligence to actually help people to become more productive with their current tasks is enormous. And I think, again, even for those jobs that are relatively routine jobs, you can have an enormous benefit for them. And it doesn't necessarily mean that these jobs disappear, but they will need to come with a lot of changes in the way these jobs are being organized and carried out. So some of the reluctance, for instance, of people to actually use these technologies need to be overcome, and show them to what extent they can actually benefit from these new technologies. The type of jobs that they're certainly disappearing is mostly in developing countries. So we have seen this in the past. A lot of these jobs disappear because simply, and it's not so much the fact that these people are not productive. It's rather that often in supply chains, you need to make sure that you have a certain guaranteed quality, and you can only make sure that you have this type of quality if everybody in the supply chain uses the same technology. So often what happens in low and middle income countries that are supplying to high income countries is they're forced to use the same technology, even though it's inefficient from their perspective. And so a lot of jobs actually disappear in these countries, despite the fact that they could produce more labor intensively, if you want, with their current
because
technology.
of the pressure of the other countries.
Exactly, because of the pressure from the final consumer to actually use the same type of technology.
So you talked about manufacturing jobs being the most targeted. Jack Ma famously quoted that Time magazine cover for the best CEO of the year will very likely be a robot in the future. It remembers better than you, it counts faster than you, and it won't be angry with competitors. Do you believe that an AI or robot could run a company smoothly? And is that a possibility in our future in the executive role?
So this is another interesting question, and I think for the moment there is a lot of research going on exactly on this issue about human-machine interaction, and to what extent machines can really play the same type of decision roles. So machines will certainly help CEOs in the future to take better decisions. But CEOs have also another role to play beyond just simply making predictions and taking decisions about which market to target. They also have to play a role in terms of facilitating interactions among their peers and obviously with the rest of the company. And it's not entirely clear to what extent an AI can really help with that or can replace a human. AI can actually help in that, but it cannot necessarily replace a human in generating and helping with interactions. So what's interesting is that people have done some studies on this, and if you put a robot into a social setting, trying to kind of help the social setting to engage more easily in communication, you want to have this robot to be relatively stupid rather than smart. If this robot is smart, everybody shuts up in the room. If the robot is stupid, people start to engaging and actually kind of almost making fun of this robot and engaging more easily in the communication. It's really strange, if you think about this. But at the end of the day, the artificial intelligence tool can actually help engage people in more communication, but to the extent to itself being not smart On the contrary, it should be a dumb computer to help actually engage people in communication. And so there is a tension, obviously. If the computer is too smart, it can help you in terms of improvements in your decision making, but at the same time, it will not help you in terms of engaging other humans in their interaction. So it depends a bit on what kind of purpose you want to solve. Do you want to solve the purpose of increasing human interactions and solving maybe, for instance, company conflicts that you have between different departments, different divisions, etc.? Or do you want to improve your decision making? And you can't have it both ways. That's the point. You can't have an AI, but you can have different AIs, but you certainly cannot have a CEO that is really stupid in one sense and dumb in the other. I think that's not possible. And in this sense, you need to actually the human. Really, at the end of the day, you still need the human to organize and get the company running.
What do you think will be the most wanted skill in the future for a job? What will change in wanted skills for jobs in the future?
I think that one of the skills that we all need certainly more in the future, and it comes out if you look at different surveys, etc., is actually not so much technical skills. I mean, we certainly need to have more quantitative skills on average, simply because our societies and our economies become more complex. But what we really need is we need to interact with other humans. We need to have social skills in the future much more. Our social network become more complex. We interact across different communities, we interact across different countries, and these type of intersocial, intercultural skills that you need for that type of environment is certainly something that we need to invest much more than we have in the past. And it's not something that you can actually properly learn in school. I mean, you learn it in school automatically as a side effect from interacting with your peers, but it's something that you will have to continuously foster over time. There might be more demand for coaching actually for this type of skills. And it might be that, as you progress in your career, as you change sectors, occupation, etc., you might actually need new types of coaching because your social setting will change. But I think this is, for me, a fundamental point. I would say that the technical skills is certainly important, but it will always be overshadowed by the increasing and rapidly increasing importance of social skills that we need to develop. Basically, if you want to add to that, basically what you need is you need to complement the machine. If you try to beat the machine, you will always
you lose.
You lose. But you need to complement the machine. And for the moment, at least, where we're really good at is on our social skills.
Social skills. So, in terms of the economy, what are some, if you can name, positive economic outcomes to this upcoming Revolution 4.0?
Well, I think we are still hoping to improve significantly our productivity. I think for the moment, at least, we don't see, as I said, we don't see much of it, but the potential is there. I think that hopefully we'll see more. These tools can help us to understand a bit better the complexity of our socioeconomic system, can help us better to understand what are the trade-offs involved in different policies around sustainability, policies around to address climate change, for instance. So I think that I call this network policies can help us. Also, if you think one area where we are working on very much at the ILO is on talent management. And again, the issue is here a question to what extent AI can help us in better managing our talent, better helping us anticipating future skills, etc. So basically improving the way our economies function. I think that's the hope. In a sense, it's a hope. It's not. But the potential is clearly there for this technology to contribute to this.
And on the flip side, what do you think are some negative economic outcomes of this?
Well, I think for the moment, at least, the biggest threat is the inequality that it produces. I think that we have certainly seen over the last 10, 15 years an increasing deterioration of our social outcomes in particular, but the socioeconomic outcomes as well. And it's not only within countries. There are obviously stark developments within some advanced economies, especially for low-income workers or households. But you see also that a lot of negative.
I think you.
Are you there?
You broke up there for a second. Sorry about that.
Yeah, sorry. No, I was just saying. So the one of the negative consequences also for developing countries is the fact that that through these platforms, through the gig economy, a lot of low-skilled, low-income work is outsourced to these countries, which in principle would be good, but in practice they don't benefit from it because the salaries are still extremely low. So they're not benefiting from actually being more involved in work that delivers services in advanced economies. So there's this high concentration of market power that comes with these new technologies, and that's certainly something that needs to be dealt with in the near future.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing in your paper you referenced how the country level income equality has worsened since 1980. And so do you predict that to continue?
Yeah, for the moment, I don't see why not, because I think that this is clearly something where we see a lot of talk, we see a lot of interest in addressing this problem, but I think nobody has really found a solution to this income inequality, and it's not easy. I mean, I've done a follow-up study on exactly trying to understand what needs to be done, and there are some ideas around introducing a digital tax, a digital taxation, but obviously countries who are very successful in terms of setting up these digital companies, they don't want their services to be taxed, whereas other countries who are less successful would want to use this tax maybe excessively. So there's a really international coordination problem here. And then there are more advanced, if you want, solutions around data ownership, but these require significant institutional innovations, which we don't see for the moment. So unfortunately, I would say it's been actually implemented. It's not that's not possible, but it takes some time before that will happen.
All right, moving forward, do you think this pandemic has given us an outlook on what our society's future work environments in terms of more distanced, more online calls? Do you feel that could be a part of our future's work environment?
Partly, I think yes. I mean, I think that the teleworking movement was already there before, and I think that this pandemic, in a sense, has accelerated this process. I don't think that we will see all the teleworking to the same extent as we are seeing it currently, simply because there's still the need for face-to-face interaction, both at the company level and internationally. I think what's more interesting, actually, this pandemic has made us realize that we need to introduce a second dimension into our policy making. So we had in the past 20 years, if you want, we looked very much into efficiency. So everything was driven to make things more efficient, more productive, etc. And it's debatable to what extent that was successful, but certainly in terms of public service delivery, a lot of public services have been reduced because of the efficiency consideration. And I think now with this pandemic, what one realizes that you also need to introduce resilience to the table. And your resilience basically mean to be able to absorb these shocks, to actually have some buffer room, some room to play and be able to shuffle resources around. And so that's for healthcare is one clear element. But I think even for labor markets, we have to make sure that we don't anticipate necessarily what's going to happen for the next 40, 50 years in terms of new technologies. And I mean, you are still pretty young. You have a career ahead of you for the next 35, 40 years easily. You don't know what the new technologies are. So you need to get an education profile that's resilient to these shocks. You need to be open to new opportunities, and something that you. And somehow our labor markets need to integrate it. You need to be able to help you, to guide you when new shocks, new technologies come, and orient you more easily towards these new opportunities. And I think a lot of countries are starting realizing is that they can no longer rely on this kind of career. You enter a company, you stay there for the next 40 years. I mean, in the US, it was never the case, but in a lot of continental European countries, people start realizing that they can no longer afford this type of thinking. They have to think ahead in terms of what kind of new companies, what kind of new industries, what kind of new occupations will come. And maybe I have to change completely careers and instead of being a software engineer at Google, I will be maybe a community manager somewhere else. And I think that's still a valuable task or occupation, but it's something that, you need to prepare these people, and you need to prepare the entire education institutions, the public policy delivery, etc. You need to orient that towards this type of goal of resilience of the labor market to this type of changes.
So a very fast evolving labor market, being more prepared for job fluctuation. Is that what you're getting at?
Yes. Exactly. That's
Hmm.
that's what it is. So you need to basically, you can't possibly anticipate all the shocks that are coming. You can't possibly
Yeah.
anticipate. No, and it doesn't have to be technology. It can be, I mean, or a new pandemic. It can be simply a new trade shock, a geopolitical conflict situation. I mean, anything you can imagine, but you can't possibly prepare for everything. So
Yeah.
what you need to make sure is that people can more easily change jobs, occupations, sectors, locations, etc., to
Hmm.
help them in their transitions. And I think that's where kind of policymakers need to integrate that type of idea. That making transitions easier, less costly. I think it's an important point, and it requires really the collaboration between companies, between obviously individual worker, but also the delivery of policies by municipalities, by state agencies, and by educational institutions.
So you've been talking about in your paper talks about how some countries are farther advanced compared to others. Could you describe which countries are farther advanced in terms of AI and what countries need to catch up? I lost you for a second.
Am I back? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back. You're back now. Did you
Okay,
hear my
good.
question?
Yeah, I heard your question. No, so it's actually not so much countries. It's rather different locations. Certain locations are really
Okay.
advanced because they have clusters of high tech companies that develop new
Uh-huh.
ideas and attract people to work there. They have the right digital infrastructure, etc. And then there are other clusters that are really further behind. And often it's a combination of basically lack of infrastructure, lack of maybe education institutions that provide the right talent for these companies, and some other idiosyncratic factors, maybe luck, maybe location, etc. Most of the time it's obviously countries in low and middle income countries that are further behind, simply because they're not necessarily well integrated in world economy. But it doesn't have to be, it's not a fate, I mean, being a low income country is not a fate in itself. And I think
Hmm.
that especially if you look at some sub-Saharan African countries, Nigeria or Kenya or so, these are countries who have a very thriving IT community that develops new innovative ideas. The problem obviously in these countries often is that they don't necessarily have the infrastructure to support that this kind of industries develop sufficiently well into the economy, so to kind of kickstart, if you want, a larger economic development cycle.
It's almost time to wrap up, but my final question for you is, when I was writing my literature review and I was researching, I found that researchers were unable to come to a consensus on if artificial intelligence will create or destroy more jobs. Do you have any thoughts on that, or a prediction for, will there be net more jobs or less jobs due to AI, and in what time period?
Yeah, I think that last point is extremely important to stress. I think that in the short run, it might certainly create more, destroy more jobs,
Hmm.
especially in those sectors where people are quick in implementing them. But over time, I mean, typically, there's no technological revolution that has left people permanently out of jobs, or
Hmm.
destroyed more jobs than it created. So I mean, I don't foresee necessarily over the longer run to have a significant job loss. I think the key question is, those who are losing their jobs, can we kind of reorient them towards new sectors and occupation where they can find new opportunities? It does exist, but often it takes some time, and especially in countries that have maybe a bit more rigid institutional system, may be more complicated to new technology lose out. But if you embrace this new technology, in the long run, you will create new jobs. But being prepared in the short run to have some cost attached to it, I think, is important, and policymakers
Hmm.
need to react to it quickly if they don't want to kind of accumulate the social problems that comes with job loss.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much.
Really
Thank you.
appreciative for you coming on.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Thanks.